Norm, good to see you, man. We got Alan out here.
Hi, Norm.
Alan.
Good to see you again.
Born in Los Angeles, and I was born downtown in a home. My mother didn't want to go to the hospital or the doctor. She's a Christian Scientist, and so I was born there. And my father was there with him, and the doctor. I was slippery, and when the doctor let me slip out of his hands, I squirmed, and he caught me from hitting the floor, or I wouldn't be here till I
Well, that explains a lot.
Yeah, it does.
My mother thought that I would be a pianist. She thought I would be the one that would be the great musician and so forth and so on. She was born in Silver City, New Mexico. Her father was a congressman at large from New Mexico. My mother's father was a congressman at large from New Mexico. And he lost the election to another guy, which was involved in something was called the Teapot Dome scandal.
Did you study regularly with a teacher?
I was forced into studying.
How old were you, Norm, when you started?
Well, my mother started me when I was 6 years old and made me practice every morning. I went to Beverly Hills High School. We lived in Beverly Hills then because there was money there. My mother taught the violin, and I had to get up early and practice. And I really didn't have the technical ability to be a fine pianist. In other words, I played fairly well. For a while I lived in Arizona and thought I wanted to be an automobile mechanic and work for my wife's uncle. I spent a year doing that, and I did learn mechanical things that were valuable to me. Went to work for the university, and the dean of the School of Music at USC knew how to tune pianos, and he experimentally, they just hire any piano tuner, and he'd come through and tune the pianos once a year, and that's about all it was. And you know, he wanted to build a better school and everything else like that. So I tuned some pianos, and he liked them, and he gave me the job, and I got the job.
So who taught you to tune pianos?
And so driving down one of the streets in Los Angeles, there was a guy that had a business that said piano tuning and repair and so forth. And he had been in the war too. And I stopped in there, and he let me, he had graduated from a piano tuning school. There was one here in Los Angeles at one time, but I went to work for him for free for a year. I learned something, and he had one good account. He had Capitol Records. And when we separated, and I studied, my piano teacher had a good piano tuner, and he helped me a little tune well. And he was a German, and I can't think of his name right now, but I'll think of it maybe down the line here. And he made me think of it, how to make it sound good from note to note. And so they hired me on the basis of 1 month, and if they liked me, I could stay there. Well, I was there 34 years, something like that. 34, and tuned to Frank Sinatra and all the big artists that worked with Capitol Records on Melrose Avenue and everything. And then they went to the Round Building.
So tell me about the Frank Sinatra session when he wanted you to tune.
As a matter of fact, Carol sang in Sinatra's orchestra. She was a good enough singer, so she was in the chorus in his orchestra, and she got to know him. But he was a very particular guy, you know. So I was at Capitol Records, and he called, Capitol had his gopher, call him. All those big shots like that have what we call a gopher. It's a guy that does all the crap that we don't want to do. And said he wanted his piano moved. Well, at that time he'd broken up with his wife, and he was living in a little apartment out in Westwood, and he wanted it tuned now, had a little spin it there now. And I said, I can't come, Mr. Sinatra. I said, I'm on standby for George Shearing. So I was standing by, and I was in the thing when he stopped playing, and things weren't going well, and he says, it's this piano. The piano's out of tune and so forth. And they had a big fate because it was a big orchestra. big orchestra, and they're paying him by the hours. We're talking about thousands of dollars and stuff like that. His arrangement wasn't working good, and all I did was put it out of tune and put it back in tune. I says, "How's that?" So he said, "That's great." And so they went back. And then I went out and tuned Frank Sinatra's piano, and he fired me. I left USC to go into the military.
Ah, okay.
To go into the
clears that up.
military,
Yeah.
and ended up in India, and ended up in India at a base there, and flew the hump. I made 140 trips across the hump, which is you had to fly on oxygen at about 20,000 feet. You wore an oxygen mask, and ice froze around your chin, and everything was cold in there.
And then you told me that you had problems. You had a heated suit that you wore or something, and they short out.
I was the captain on the airplane, so they had heated suits that they rented. And being the chief pilot and being the guy, the co-pilot didn't get to sit in it, so I had this, and I plugged it in. It reminds me of something that kept me warm. And I was there one time, and it was raining like hell, and it was dripping down in there, and it got a short. I grabbed it like this, it hurt like hell, and it started to burn. I grabbed it and pulled the plug, but the rain was falling all over me. And see, we didn't have closed airplanes in those days.
You said during the war that Steinway built these climatized pianos, these upright Steinways, that were heavy as hell, and the grunts who had to carry them around for the USO performances.
Oh yeah, I met the guy that was in charge of that. Did I tell you that? I met him, and he told me about it, and they got sick of moving. His boss, who was a sergeant, made him move the same pianos all the time. They got sick, so they put a bomb in it and blew it up.
You told me a story once about that Kansas was a dry state, and that the Reverend had to make a liquor run for you. Tell us about
Oh, he was a post chaplain. He was a big drinker. He was a big Catholic drinker, and Kansas was dry at that time, and so we didn't dare carry booze in our cars. And about every 2 weeks, we'd send him to Kansas City, Missouri, and he'd buy cases of booze and put it in the trunk. And coming back one time, he got stopped for speeding, and he says, well, Reverend, what do you got in the trunk? He said, I got 3 cases of booze. He said, I'll get out of here. So someone that knew me helped me get a job at Fredville, tuning pianos on the floor at $1.50 a piece. And I went to work for him, and when he sold the piano, he sent me to tune it free. He got a free tuning, and I generally got about $6 for going to tune the piano.
A couple of stories that I remember you telling me about working for Bell. One of them had to do with a soundboard collapsing on a piano.
Oh, okay.
So
okay.
tell us that one.
Well, the guy that was working on it wasn't me, and so he was tuning away there, and boom, it collapsed. In other words, it went the wrong way. You couldn't get the action in. And so Fred, yeah, I like that story. And Fred said, Norm, see what you can do. He said, why don't you put a sound post in? So that's what I did. And then I found a pathway where I could stick a pound post in it, because you couldn't get the action in. And I cut a slot in the action, and I cut a slot in the piano itself, so I could slide it in there, and then I cranked it up, and it went like that. Muriel Kerr was one of our pianists at USC, and she knew Heifetz well, and he said, he's gonna make you play ping pong. And I said, you gotta be kidding. He said, no, everybody has to play ping pong before they get to do anything in his place. So I go and And he says, and now I said, where's the piano? He said, well, we're gonna play ping pong out here first. And so he beat me 21 to 1. And I used to play ping pong all the time in the military service. I mean, we used to play in the men's gym and all the time. And so I went and practiced. I went to a place and practiced. And I came back one day and tuned the piano and beat him 21 to 1 and 21 to nothing. And I didn't have to tune the piano. I didn't have to.
You don't have to play ping pong
I
anymore.
didn't have to play ping pong anymore. But the part of it, the part that you want to hear is when I started to tune for him the first time, and he's home in the piano in the home. And he says, "Now I want you to know that I want the last octave, the last note in the octave to be almost D." I said, "But Mr. Heifetz," I said, you've got to start that 2 or 3 octaves below, so that it just gradually gets there." He said, I don't care." He said, that's what I want." And so I didn't know what the hell to do, and I turned around. I took the tuning hammer, and I turned it over and handed it to him. And I said, "Why don't you show me what you mean?" He says, "I tried that once, and it was a disaster." And so I was his piano tuner for many years.
Tell me about Heifetz and air conditioning.
Oh, that's at USC. USC. Was I a funny guy? Was I? USC, the dean of the university, of the School of Music, Heifetz, had a studio of his own, and so did Piatigorsky. He had a studio of his own. Heifetz wanted windows in his studio that you could open and close, and Piatigorsky didn't care. Piatigorsky was a very good-natured guy, and he didn't care. So he comes to me, he says, "What are we going to do with this?" He says, "We're going to let him regulate the temperature in there." And he says, "How?" "You're going to go out and buy a gold-plated thermostat." He says, "But that's central air. You can't do anything with central air." And so he tried to explain to him what central air was. I said, "You're going to screw it to the wall. You're going to screw it to the wall, and he can play with it." And that's exactly what he did.
It didn't do anything.
So it didn't do anything.
Come on in here, he'd go over there, and nothing happened. Now, after Heifetz had a falling out with USC, the dean at that time, the doctor, he was the first dean, asked him to open a studio downtown next to the music center. And he says, "Go down there and see what you can do." Now, the overhang up above, these pigeons gathered and mated up above, and he teaching the violin, quack, 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 you know. And so he had to send a guy around. There's 2 stories about him. He had to send a guy around that trapped the pigeons. I'd go in there, tune the piano, and they'd be mating on the wall there, and make all this noise. Well, I didn't understand why he didn't like that. It was another air conditioning story, and only they didn't get to me soon enough. I wasn't able to put a control unit in there, and so he froze the place up. In other words, the air conditioning broke, but it got down below 0, and they couldn't teach. They went out there to teach in the piano, and the dean called me, and he said, "For God's sake, Norman, get out there and get those pianos in tune." I worked all day long get there with the pigeons, and the guy that was catching the pigeons was working there too, catching the pigeons. Mrs. Nance was the piano teacher down here in Redondo. I studied with her for a while, but she couldn't stand me being a boy. I was how difficult. And she never had any children of her own, but her husband was a minister. She called me one day and says, "There's something wrong with the pedals. Something's wrong with the pedals. And so why don't you come see it?" And so I said, "Well, I will. I'll come right away, Mrs. Nance, right away." And so I canceled what I was doing and went to see it. And I got down at the bottom, and there was urine all over the pedal works, all over the pedal works, all over each leg, and it stunk like crazy. And of course, I don't mind them doing that. You can fix that, but boy, if they do it inside, that's another story. So anyhow, she left. And so K. Nance was his name, and he was always sticking his nose in everything that everybody did. He says, "What's the matter with those pedals?" He says, "Well, I'm sorry to tell you, Mr. Nance, that your little dog Chico has been urinating on the pedals and the legs and everything else." And he says, "Well, that's too bad. What's that going to cost?" And I said, $300. That little son of a bitch.